Welcome to this evening's program, and many thanks to the Unitarian congregation and church here for their hospitality. We're so grateful, I think, to all be in this beautiful space together for a little while on a Tuesday evening. My name is Ecology Singh Khalsa, and I serve as the Executive Director of the Amah Mutsun Land Trust, which is an initiative of the Amah Mutsun Tribal Band. And while I am not a member of the tribe, I serve in that capacity as a guest of the tribe. So it's my great privilege to introduce our esteemed panel for a conversation about the very important efforts that are being made to protect the lands known as Juristac, more recently designated Sargent's Ranch. And I'll introduce each of our panel as they come forward and give you a little bit about their background, and they're going to speak. And there will be time at the end of the three presentations for a question and answer period, and opportunity for us to learn a little more if we have those questions. Our first speaker is Alice Kaufman, who is a colleague of ours and with whom I've worked for the past year or so. And Alice is Legislative Advocacy Director for the Committee for Green Foothills. And as most of you may know, the Committee for Green Foothills has been working in support of open spaces since 1962. It's a long time, and I'm also happy to say that Alice has served in her present position for the past 7 years and has been involved in countless campaigns to protect and preserve open space, and is working diligently to prevent this permit from being issued by the county. Alice.
Thank you, Ecology, and thank you everyone for being here tonight. It's so great to see you here. Is this loud enough? Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so I've been told, so this is for you too, you need to speak into the microphone like this, like if you hold it down, they can't hear you, so you gotta do that.
Very good.
So, and if my voice dies off, if I'm not getting loud enough, just give a shout, and I'll fix it. So, yes, so I'm with Committee for Green Foothills, and as Ecology said, we work to preserve open space and natural resources, and have for the past 50-some years. We work only in San Mateo County and Santa Clara County, so we call ourselves local, vocal, and effective. We just do a few things and try to do them as thoroughly as possible. So can we go to my presentation now? Are we ready for that? Who's doing that? Cats. Poor cat. I can push the button for myself. Would that make it easier? Seriously. Should I just stand over there and do it and advance my own slides? Well, I can use a different button. Yeah, I can use the bell slide. Should I do that? Okay, all right. Can we go back one? Yeah. All right. Oops, didn't want to. All right, look real fast before it goes again. There it is. All right, whatever, that was good. You got the general gist. That was an aerial view.
They have 1 second timer.
Oh.
You just talk and all.
Okay, I'll just talk. All right, so I'm going to give you a little bit of background. So Juristac is, I'm going to assume you don't know very much about it. So even though I'm sure a lot of you do, I'm going to just give you the background. So this is an area of land that is at the very southern part of Santa Clara County and also extends partway into Santa Cruz County. The property that's combined under single ownership is about 6,500 acres, and this is what's known as Sargent Ranch. It encompasses a wide variety of topography and habitat and landscapes. It includes hillside grasslands, creeks with riparian woodlands, wetland areas, serpentine grasslands. Serpentine is a very important habitat that Stu is going to be talking a little bit more later on. And there's a really unique, interesting feature is natural tar seeps, which are very, very rare. So it's a really unique area. Okay, and now so you can see there where it is. This image actually is from the application for the quarry, what was submitted to the county. So that's why it says project location. When they say project, they're talking about the proposed quarry. So you can see where it is there. It's just southwest of Gilroy. So, all right. So can we go to the next slide? Okay. So I thought you'd be interested in knowing some of the history of all the development proposals on this site, because there have been a lot. So in 1992, there was a proposal that was submitted for 4,000 houses, an industrial park, 1 million square feet, a hotel with a spa and conference center, an 18-hole golf course, a school, and an equestrian center with polo fields. So this project was rejected by the county because it was in conflict with the county's general plan, which said you can't have that intense level of development in this rural area. And then, next slide. And then in 2001, another proposal was submitted, this time for only 137 homes, but for 2 golf courses. That project also was withdrawn. That would have needed a zoning change, and it was withdrawn really at the last minute when it became clear that the Board of Supervisors wasn't going to allow that zoning change. Okay, next slide. And then, so then the property owner went bankrupt, and the new owners, which were led by the majority owner of Debt Acquisition Company of America, which we refer to as DACA, which sometimes causes some confusion. But just remember that in this context, DACA means the landowner. They submitted an application for a sand and gravel quarry in 2015. So the main procedural difference between this proposal and the previous ones is that a sand mine on this property is not going to require a zoning change. So they finally learned not to do that. On the other hand, they're still going to need to get a use permit approved. And so our job is basically to stop the county from granting that approval. It's not as sort of like it's not as high of a bar as a zoning change, but it is still an approval that's going to happen. Next slide. Thanks. So this is the details of the project, of the quarry. This is an open pit mining operation, mining for sand and gravel. It's going to cover 320 acres. There will be 4 separate pits worked in stages. They'll start in, there'll be phase 1 and then phase 2 and so on. They're going to be going hundreds of feet deep in order to get to the material that they want. They estimate, this is all from the project application, which is from 2015, so it's always possible that when the EIR comes out, they will have changed the project description slightly. That sometimes happens. So they estimate there will be about 40 to 50 million tons excavated. This will take hundreds of daily truck trips to move the material away from the site out to the customers who will be buying it. There will be a 14-acre processing plant. They're going to have to put in roads for the trucks to go on and a 1.6-mile-long conveyor belt to move the material. They're estimating that they're going to have to pump about 76,000 gallons of groundwater each day for their quarry operations. And this is going to go on for 30 years, or longer. 30 years is their estimate. And then at the end of it, they do what's called reclamation, which is required by state law. So don't let anybody tell you that they're doing you a favor by doing this. But what they mean by reclamation is just taking the waste rock, the overburden, and putting it back in the pit so that it's not quite as deep of a pit as it was before. And then they put like grass seed or something like that on it to get the, so that it's not just bare rock. And that's called reclamation. It doesn't restore the landscape to anything like what it was before. Those hills still have giant cavities scooped out of them. Okay, next slide. And so this again is from the project application. That shows you the 2, basically the 4 pits, the 2 there at the bottom, and then kind of a larger area at the top with the other 2 pits up in there. And then you can see Highway 101 going sort of right next to where that is. So and you can kind of like see from the, you kind of see by looking at the satellite image that it's going to be on the hillsides, and that there's this valley going through there, which is where one of the creeks goes. Okay, next slide. And so this is the timeline. So we have recently been told by the County Planning Department that they are expecting to release the draft EIR in the first couple of weeks of November. We're assuming that they're going to stick to that timeline. They've had to push off of their estimated date of release before, but we're pretty close to that time, so we finally think that we're going to really see the DEIR at this point. But they've also said they're going to do an extended public comment period, which is good. Typically for an EIR, you only get about 45 days for a comment period. This time they said they want to do at least 75 days, partly because they know the project is controversial and they expect there to be a lot of public comment, and also partly because of the holiday season. They want to make sure that everybody has plenty of time to get their comments ready. And we've also been told that there's going to be an opportunity to present oral comments at the January Planning Commission meeting, the regular meeting of the Planning Commission, which is on January 23rd. So again, that's something that could potentially change, but that is what they're aiming for right now. So what happens after that, after the comment period closes and they stop accepting comments, then the county goes back and reviews the comments, and they have to provide responses to all of the comments. So that can take a long time, especially when there's a lot of comments. So that could then take a few months, or we don't know, but a few months is probably a good estimate. And then they will put it all together in a document called the final EIR, which has all of the comments and all of the responses incorporated in it. And then the final EIR and the application for the use permit go to the Planning Commission for approval. And so there will be another Planning Commission hearing, and that's where they'll vote, is at that meeting. That is, under the county procedures, that is the final vote. But the decision is appealable to the Board of Supervisors. And in this case, we're pretty sure it will be appealed, because if they vote to approve, we'll appeal it, and if they vote to deny, the landowners will appeal it. So this is going to end up in front of the Board of Supervisors one way or the other. Okay, so what are we doing? We are not just sitting around and waiting for this to happen. We are organizing. And okay, can you go to the next slide? I knew I had more information. So what can you do? So when the EIR comes out, we are going to be asking people to submit comments. It can be as detailed as you like, or it can be a really short statement of, I oppose this quarry, do not approve this quarry, right? The important thing is to get the public show of opposition to the quarry in there. When you submit your comments, there'll be an email address in county planning for you to send it to. You can also CC the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors. The easy way to do it is there's a clerk of the Planning Commission and a clerk of the board, and so you just CC them as well. And we can send out the emails for those. Then you can also attend the January 23rd Planning Commission. You can give oral comment there. You can also just turn in your written comments at that time. Oral comments are responded to just the same as written ones, so it's just as good. Although you will have a limited time to speak. Usually they'll allow you 2 minutes. If there's a lot of people, they may cut you down to 1 minute so that they're not there all day. Just be aware of that. So what can you do in the meantime? You can do things like send letters to the editor. You can tell your friends and neighbors. You can post on social media. You can send out emails to all of your networks. Just spread the word, because this is really important to get a whole lot of, I keep saying this, but it's really important to get a whole lot of public opposition going. That is what makes the difference with the Board of Supervisors, because they're politicians. They know, people vote for them, and this is probably something that's going to get covered in the news, and they don't necessarily want to get called out as, the politicians that approved a quarry on sacred Native American grounds. So, and I think that's it. Do I have one more slide, or is that it? Yeah. So that's it. Thanks.
All right.
Thank you, Alice. I'd like to introduce our next speaker. Stuart Weiss is a conservation ecologist and the founder and chief scientist at his firm called Creekside Science. He has his PhD in ecology and evolution from Stanford and has been doing conservation work in the Bay Area for the past 30 years. Please welcome Stuart Weiss.
So
I'm going to give a quick tour of some of the key natural resources, some of which are at risk with the sand quarry. So this is a beautiful view of the interior of Juristac. We're looking west towards Santa Cruz County, and there's the fog bank there. It's a really beautiful spot there. Next slide. Alice mentioned the tar spring. It's a really, really interesting part of the site. Very, very unique. Next slide. And there's actually oil wells on the property. I just saw that they're very low-grade oil used for road construction. But it's the only functioning oil, quote, field
Put the mic
in
closer to your mouth.
In Santa Clara County. Thank you. Next slide. There's about 65 acres of serpentine grassland. That's a very rare and important habitat type. A couple of listed or covered rare species on it. Next. But it's not Bay checker spot butterfly habitat. It's too small and isolated, and it's also well outside the quarry footprint. They're not interested in the serpentine. They're interested in the sand and gravel. Next slide. Now getting to the wildlife, the puma is it's a really, really important species in the Santa Cruz Mountains. Next slide. The population in the Santa Cruz Mountains is really high risk from small population size and isolation. It's very susceptible to inbreeding because it might just be a few dominant males that are doing most of the breeding. And we all have a good sense of what happens with inbreeding. You start accumulating recessive traits that lead to a loss of fitness and a lot of sick animals. The population desperately needs immigrants, and it's the juvenile males that are the dispersal phase, so we have to have some juvenile males making their way into the Santa Cruz Mountains and successfully breeding, which is a relatively rare event, especially given how isolated the mountains are. And Sargent Ranch is used by pumas. They're being tracked by the Santa Cruz Puma Project, and there are radio tracks of pumas using Juristac. Next slide. Most recently, there's been a really good genetic study of puma in California. We're there in the black area, the central north coast population, and it's genetically distinct from the rest of California. And it also has a very small, what we call effective population size, about 17 animals, which means that the processes of genetic drift and inbreeding will rapidly deplete genetic diversity. And this is the kind of phenomena where you'll be looking, look like it's doing okay, and then suddenly you can see a complete collapse of the population. Next slide. The Center for Biological Diversity recently petitioned for the Central Coast North, that's our pumas, and other subpopulations, for listing under the California Endangered Species Act based on this genetic study because they're so at risk and because they've been so cut off from the rest of the state, especially the ones in Southern California. Next slide. Another great species that people really need to appreciate more is the badger. We have an isolated population in the Santa Cruz Mountains that's at risk from small population size. Badgers do not have dense populations, so there just aren't that many individuals in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and they're cut off from the rest of California, and they're also cut off internally, especially by Highway 17, the northern and southern Santa Cruz Mountains. There's definitely been roadkill on Highway 101, and badgers are not very vehicle smart. They're very aggressive members of the weasel family, and normally they can just like kick ass at anything that's after them, but when they come up against 18-wheelers barreling down the freeway, it's not a pretty sight. And there's currently a study in the northern Santa Cruz Mountains that is taking a good look at the population distribution and population genetics. So we'll know a lot more about badgers in the Santa Cruz Mountains soon. Next slide. So when you look at all these landscape linkage studies across in the state of California, Sargent Juristac shows up as like a really critical way in and out of the Santa Cruz Mountains. Next slide. All those arrows, the orange and the pink, are basically linkages that have been identified by various studies and compiled by the Santa Clara Valley Habitat Agency for our local habitat plan. And, literally all roads lead through Juristac. It's really one of the only ways to get in and out of the Santa Cruz Mountains. Next slide. So it's tenuous at best. There's really only 2 semi-intact linkages between the Diablo Range and the Santa Cruz Mountains. Coyote Valley, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. Been a lot of attention paid there. And then in the Pajaro area, up the Pajaro River, and that's directly through Juristac. And there's really only one to the Gavilan Range, across the Chittenden Gap, which is where the Pajaro River heads towards the ocean, and again, that's Juristac. Next slide. So this is from the biotic report. The various polygons outlined in red are areas that are either the pits or the topsoil and overburdened stockpiles. So you can see up at the north there's a lot of activity, the phase 1 and phase 2, and then a lot of the processing is going to be taking place up there. Next slide. So that circle is the bridge where Highway 101 goes over the Pajaro River, which is one of the major wildlife crossings. Very well documented use by many species of that bridge, and you can see that we're kind of getting surrounded by these impact areas. Next. Also, we have the bridge at Tar Creek, which is right next to the processing area. So they really picked a good spot for cutting off this particular aspect of the wildlife linkages. And it's not a complete cutoff, but we're definitely in the mode of death by 1,000 cuts. It's already pretty tenuous. This is definitely not making it better. Next slide. And the Biological Resources Report was very dismissive of impacts on wildlife passage, but we're not going to let them get away with it. Next slide. So this is kind of my take-home statement. If we're really serious about wildlife connectivity, putting a large industrial complex smack in the middle of a critical wildlife linkage is not a very good idea. So that's my professional opinion here. Next slide. There are also The land has been occupied by steelhead trout. Tar Creek has had steelhead trout in it. The Pajaro River steelhead runs are in really, really poor shape. We're talking about the literal handful of fish are still persisting in the Pajaro Basin. Tar Creek supported steelhead in the past. It's unknown status at this point. And Tar Creek runs right by the overburden pile and is supposedly going to be protected by a 150-foot buffer as stated in the EIR. We'll also be taking a very close look at that. Next slide. Then there are the watershed values. Juristac has multiple watersheds. The one where the most impacts are going to be is Sargent Creek watershed. Next slide. The watershed's about 1,269 acres, and that's the focus of where the quarry activity is. It flows directly into the lower Pajaro. Some estimates that it provides hundreds of acre-feet of groundwater recharge and runoff. And the recharge in this area, which is water that gets below the rooting zone, provides a summer base flow in the creek so that there's always water. And that's, kind of a function of the underlying geology, which is these layers of sand and gravel and clay that transport or block the flow of water. So the reason there's water in Sargent Creek is because water's been stored in the aquifer and is slowly released over the summer. Next slide. So this is a rough view of where the quarry pits are going to be. You can see it's smack in the middle of Sargent Creek watershed. Next slide. And really it would mean the end of integrity for this Sargent Creek watershed, where you're digging pits that are hundreds of feet deep through a very complex aquifer. It's going to be quite a different place if they go ahead and do this project. Next slide. So here's a little closer look. This is a map that came out of the biotic report. Here we have phase 3 and phase 4 pits. These are literally going to be hundreds of feet deep, kind of right on either side of the creek. And then we have the overburden stockpile and the topsoil stockpile that are right next to the creek. I believe they're giving it a 150-foot buffer. And they claim it's not going to have an effect on the creek. Next slide. So if this goes through, I would go, Sargent Creek, rest in peace. It's just going to really trash the watershed. So that's a really important value we need to think about. Next slide. And it turns out Sargent Creek supports California red-legged frogs, which in an unusual stream-dwelling population, that most of the red-legged frogs we find these days are in stock ponds on ranches, because they used to be incredibly abundant on the valley floors where we had wetlands and vernal pool complexes, but we all know what's happened to our valley floor, so now they're living out in these small habitats in the foothills and the mountains, and it's a far cry from what they used to be, which is the former distribution. And these places where we find red-legged frogs living in natural creeks are actually very, very rare, and it's much more like the ancestral condition that red-legged frogs used to have, as opposed to these artificial stock ponds. So the red-legged frog is going to be a pretty major emphasis in our EIR comments. Next slide. So the EIR comment period, Alice already covered it pretty well. It's an opportunity to take on the details of the impact assessment. And anybody who's been through this process knows that EIRs are generally written to minimize the project impacts. That's why there are comments to bring forth impacts that have been minimized or not even dealt with. And the way this works is the comments need to be addressed, but if you have an objection, it can be overruled as a difference of expert opinion because the project proponent can get their biologist to say, oh no, that's not a problem. We have a difference of expert opinion. So it's not it's definitely not a surefire way to stop projects, but it's a really, really important step. And I think that's my last slide. Yeah, that's my last slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Stu. My last speaker is Chairman Valentin Lopez. And Chairman Lopez has served as, and serves presently as, the Tribal Council Chair for the Amah Mutsun Tribal Band. He's also the president and one of the founders of the Amah Mutsun Land Trust, and my boss. So I want to do a good job here. But most importantly to me, Val, since the early 2000s, after retiring early from a professional career, has worked tirelessly to serve the members of the Amah Mutsun Tribal Band, to help them return to their ancestral territory, and to find a way to begin again the stewardship which his ancestors undertook within that territory for at least 10,000 years. His work to protect and preserve Juristac is unceasing and tireless. It's really a great honor for me to introduce Val Lopez. Val.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for being here this evening. The true story of Native Americans in California and in San Jose, Santa Clara County has never been told.
That's right.
And it's a sad, tragic story. Our creation story takes place at Mount Amanum, which was the tallest mountain in the Santa Cruz Mountains until the military lopped off the top 40, 50 feet of Mount Amanum to put a military radar base there. This area of Santa Cruz, the central coast of California and inland to this valley, was the most populated area of indigenous people north of Mexico City. And it's estimated that at one time, over 1 million Indians, Native Americans, lived in California. It said those early explorers that came in, Vizcaino, Cabrillo, Balboa, that they brought disease. And that disease just devastated the Native American populations, so that at first contact with the Spaniards in 1769, our numbers had been reduced to 350,000. Our people have been here a very long time. 12, 14, 15,000 years or more. And if you think of that in terms of generations, that would be 800, 900, perhaps 1,000 generations or more that our people have been here. People often refer to Native Americans as hunters and gatherers. That is not true, and that is insulting. It's an effort to oversimplify their lives. The Native Americans very intentionally, very effectively managed and stewarded the lands. Our creation story tells us that it is our responsibility to take care of Mother Earth and all living things. Creator gave us a responsibility to take care of the four-legged, the finned, the winged, those that hop, those that crawl, those that slither. They're all our responsibilities. We have the responsibility to take care of the moon, to take care of the rivers, to take care of the fog and the plants. They're all our relatives. Our people learned how to take, how to provide and ensure that all living things, the bears, for example, the bears did not hibernate. They needed a food resource year-round. And so we took care of the resources there to ensure that there was adequate resources for them throughout the 4 seasons. Our people learned first and most importantly is that the lands were sacred. And it was our responsibility to maintain that sacredness of the land. And that's why we developed ceremonies and prayers and other ways of recognizing and giving thanks, such as reciprocity. When we take something, we always leave something in its place as a replacement. Our people had prayers to call back the migrating geese, the migrating salmons. Our ancestors had prayers to have balance in the 4 seasons so that we wouldn't have too much drought, too much summer and therefore have drought, or too much winter and have flooding. Our people learned how to use fire as a tool to manage landscapes so the landscape doesn't get wild and we don't have catastrophic fires as we're experiencing today in both northern and southern California. Our people learned that a person who had true value, true riches, true worth, had 2 qualities, 2 of the most important qualities. It was not what kind of car do you drive, what neighborhood or house do you live in. What was most important to our ancestors is how much of that traditional indigenous knowledge that had been passed on from generation to generation did you carry? Do you know the places of power? Do you know the ceremonies for wellness, for healing, for renewal? Do you know how to take care of land, the food plants, the medicine plants, the basketry plants, etc.? That was the knowledge our people learned and passed on generation to generation. So knowledge of that indigenous, the indigenous knowledge that had been passed on was one of the most important things. The second thing was relationships. Relationships within tribal members, relationships with neighboring tribes, but also relationships with the wildlife, relationships with the lands, with the rivers, with the oceans, with the trees. Relationships with Creator. Did you have a relationship with Creator where you could pray to Creator, and whenever Creator would communicate with you, you would recognize it, you would understand it, you would answer, you would communicate with Creator. That's the kind of relationship our people had. And that's what made our people, that is what made the true worth of a person. That indigenous knowledge to take care of our environment and the importance of relationships. That's what our tribe is working to get back to today. We had brutal periods of history. We had the mission period with slavery and brutality and incredible high death rates. And then we had the Mexican period where our environments were completely wiped out. They bring in the grazing grasses for these large ranchos that had herds of horses and cattle and sheep and pigs. And then they completely changed our landscapes. And then came the American period where there was genocide. the paying of bounties, the paying of militias to go out and hunt down Indians and to kill them. That was a brutal period. I was asked to be chair to run for chair in 2003 by the elders. In our culture, when the elders ask about, when they ask you to do something, it's not a true question. It's more of it's a directive, or you will do this. And that was clearly understood, based on the way I was brought up. And another clue was that my name was the only one on the ballot. So I was elected chair in 2003. In 2006, the tribal elders came to a tribal council meeting and said, our creation story tells us that it's our obligation to take care of Mother Earth and all living things. And Creator has never rescinded that. We have to find a way to get back and to do that. And so since 2006, our people have been working to come back to these lands. But one of the goals of our lands is to protect the few remaining cultural and sacred sites of our people. So many of them have been destroyed by development, by freeways. When they were developing Highway 101 from here to Morgan Hill, Gilroy, I believe the number was 1,100, over 1,100 of our ancestors were dug up in building Highway 101 from San Jose to Gilroy. And that's just shameful.
Yes.
So, based on the directive to get back, to take care of Mother Earth and all living things, our people started working to restore that indigenous knowledge that we had lost. And then in 2012, we developed a land trust. And our land trust has four goals, four elements to it. The first one is protecting and preserving the few sacred and cultural sites that remain. And that's why we're here tonight. Currently, as you've heard, there's an effort to destroy Juristac. They want to take the most sacred site of the Amah Mutsun tribe and just monetize it. The people that bought this, they're just investors. They're just unemotional, cold-blooded investors. What they want to do is they buy it out of bankruptcy, and then they look for ways to monetize it. What they decided on here was to get a mining permit. I talked to the managing director of DACA, and he said that what they do is they just look to flip the property. They get this mining permit, and then they sell it. They sell it for 3 or 4 times its current appraised value. If I'm not mistaken, its current appraised value is about $30 million. If they get the permit, they can sell it for $90 to $120 million and walk away with a hefty profit in a matter of a few years. And it means, and our Native American and our ties to that land, our cultural and spiritual ties to that land means nothing to them. But not only does it mean nothing to them, it means nothing to the local and state governments or to the federal government. We are a federally unrecognized tribe. There's no laws that will protect our Native American spirituality. I tell you, if we were Catholic or Christian, some other Christian denomination, or Muslim, or Jewish, or Buddhist, if we were any other religion, and this was known as a sacred site, they wouldn't dare think of proposing a sand and gravel mining on a most sacred site for many of those religions. But because we're Native American, because we're federally unrecognized, it doesn't matter. Native American spirituality has never been protected, has never been valued, has never been recognized. Those early historians and anthropologists, when they would write their reports, they'd go out and they'd look for artifacts. and they would document all the artifacts and stuff like that. But never, or very, very seldom, did they ever talk about the Native American spiritual sites, because they were not seen as important. Juristac. What does Juristac mean? Juristac translates to place of the big head. Our big head dances were our most important ceremonies. Our most important ceremonies. And they were the most important ceremonies of not only Amah Mutsun peoples, they were the most important ceremonies of many tribes, all the way to the Pomo and well above the Pomo, up into the far north of California. And inland too. They all had big head dances. Let me tell you about Juristac, the place Juristac. We had 4 tribal villages there. And it was a responsibility of those 4 people to keep Juristac sacred by having ceremony, by tending the lands, by taking care of the lands in the way the Creator asked them to, by taking care of the wildlife, by taking care of the plants and the rivers. That was a responsibility, and they did that for thousands and thousands of years. Juristac is also the home of our spiritual leader. Our spiritual leader is Kuksui. And it was at Juristac where Kuksui lived. How is it that we're even talking about this subject today? How is it that we're doing that? I feel that for us to be successful in stopping this mining permit from being approved, our tribe is left with 2 choices. Convince the public to support our tribe. Get the public to support our tribe and put pressure on the County Board of Supervisors to deny this permit. The only other alternative that we have is to beg. As a federally unrecognized tribe, that's all we can do is just beg. Beg the county, please. Please don't destroy our sacred site. Please recognize the value of our Native American spirituality. Please recognize that that is so important for our survival going forward as a future, as a tribe. You know, I talked about that history of the mission period, and the Mexican period, and the American period. All 3 of those periods, they wanted to destroy and dominate Native American spirituality, Native American culture, Native American environments, and Native American peoples. They wanted to destroy that. Well, that period, that destruction, that domination, those periods never ended. That's right. They just evolved. And they evolved to the immortal laws, regulations, and policies that we see today. I told a supervisor that if he votes to approve Juristac, he would be a perpetrator equal to the destruction of Native Americans as those who killed the Indians for bounties, as those who paid bounty monies to the bounty hunters, to those who passed laws of endangered servitude of California Indians. California Indians were endangered in California into the 1930s. They passed laws that legalized the kidnapping of Indians, mostly children. And they were sold. They were sold to white families so they could grow up to be white and to take the Indian out of them. Over 10,000 people were kidnapped that way under the laws of kidnapping. That destruction and domination of Native Americans continue to this day. There's many other laws in the books today that I won't go into, but there's many other laws in the books today that allow the continued destruction and domination of Native American people. And I'd like you to know that it's not your fault. We don't blame anyone here. It is not your fault. But we do ask you to realize how much you benefited. How much you truly benefited from that destruction and domination of Native Americans. And we ask you to stand with us and say enough is enough. We will not allow that any longer. We will stand with the Amah Mutsun and Juristac. We will get our neighbors, we will get our friends, we will get our families to support this. And together we will send a loud message to the boards of supervisors, to the county planners, that destruction and domination and dehumanization of Native Americans, that period is over. You heard earlier of the steps you can take. I know Alice laid out a lot of them, and Stu laid out a number of things. We ask you to do that, please. You know, and we ask you to sign the petition, for example. But don't stop by signing the petition. Send that petition to your family members. If you work or you have other social circles you're in, send it to your social circles. If you're on social media, send it to your social media contacts. Get involved that way. Write letters and get that same community, that same social community you have, to write letters. We also have a letter that we're asking organizations to sign on. Get your organization to sign on that letter. And I'll ask Alice when I'm done talking to talk about that letter for a minute, and she'll tell you about that, so that organizations can sign that letter. And work with the organizations that you belong to get them to support the Amah Mutsun and opposing the mining permit. Please stand with us. Thank you very much.
I wanted to just give us an opportunity maybe to continue this conversation with any questions that are from the audience. It's such a powerful thing to consider. It's a really important moment. I'll just add that I've been involved in nonprofit world and environmental protection, but I've also been involved in real estate development. And what's clear to me is that the thesis of the proponents is false. They keep claiming that they need to protect this land by getting a permit to mine the gravel. And that is absolutely untrue. As everyone here understands, the DACA organization received a full price offer to purchase the land from them right now, cash. Tens of millions of dollars was raised by regional organizations, environmental groups, to clear them out, pay what they deserve at the current appraised value, and cover their costs. So what they are fighting to do is to make the extraordinary profit about which Val spoke. They are not in the sand and gravel business. They are not a family who's desperately trying to find resources for their sand and gravel customers. They are folks who want to turn a quick profit by destroying this land. And that strikes me as completely and utterly unfair. So I hope we will support this effort. Are there any questions that folks would like to ask? You want to speak to the mic?
Sargent Valley, where one of the pits is supposed to go.
My name is Sandy Perry, and I was sent here by the Southbay Community Land Trust because we heard that you had a land trust. And we were interested in working together with you and learning from your experience. Because we're a very new organization, and actually some of the very things that you're talking about that are happening to Juristac are actually happening to our own community right here. We have thousands and thousands of people who are living out in the streets with nothing but a tent and no place to go, and who are harassed continually by police, who are driven from place to place, and who are living in complete misery in the middle of the richest place in the entire world. And so we, a group of people who were upset with this and upset with what's going on here, formed this community land trust. It's called Southbay Community Land Trust, and they sent me here to meet with you. So and that does offer some opportunities as to how we might be able to build support for the Amah Mutsun, because the types of things that are going on there are not helping thousands and thousands of people who live here. I think we can maybe get some support that way. So thank you.
Thank you very much for that comment. I'd ask you to, you have a business card with you?
Yes.
Echo card, I'll give you a business card, and let's sit down and talk.
Very
We'd
good.
love to talk to you.
Thank you.
I'm Reverend Nancy Palmer Jones, the minister here at First Unitarian, and thank you so much for bringing this crucial message to us in such a powerful way. I have two questions. One of them I think is really short, and that is that biological resources report that claims that there will be minimal impact. Is that from the biologists that are part of the folks who wrote the proposal? Is that what that is?
Yes, they were hired by the developer to kind of do all the studies, and it's pretty standard operating practice. You know, it's not anything sleazy or anything. It's just the way the system works, and it's available at the county website and will be part of the draft environmental impact report.
So do those biologists have a vested interest in supporting the proposal by any chance?
I don't think a direct vested interest. It's just the business model of environmental consulting firms
Yes.
is to,
Hire themselves out?
they're paid and,
Clients lose land.
right, so that,
Right,
they want to do the client's bidding,
yes,
basically.
right, okay.
And, it's just the system we've set up, that's the way it works these
Right.
days.
So that's the one set of experts that we would be up against?
Yes.
Okay. My second question is about the relationships that you all have formed already. So relationships with the supervisors, that direct face-to-face relationship that you talked about, Val, which truly set out the comparison of how some people, of how legally and in other ways, structurally, systemically, where the horrors of the past, the destruction of the past is being continued intentionally, and that we have this opportunity to make a turn. So can you just speak to how strong are those relationships right now? How strong are the relationships that other partners with you have been bringing? You know, some of us, I'm brand new, my darlings, to this particular group, but my people, the people I serve at First Unitarian are not. And some of us have been organizing. I'm thinking about my own relationships that I've built with supervisors and things like that. So could you just speak to that quality of relationship that you have so far?
Well, you said something really important. I'm going to just jump to that first.
Good.
You said you had relationships with the boards of supervisors. Mm-hmm. That's another very, very important step that can happen. You can ask we encourage all people that have a relationship, or even if you do not have a relationship,
build it.
To call the board of supervisors, request a meeting, and go on in there. You can go by yourself or take others with you, and let them know that you and the organization or organizations plural, oppose the sand and gravel mining. That's really important. Now, relationships. Whenever we developed our land trust, when we were starting to think about forming our land trust, and that was our 2006 to 2008 period, the most difficult thing we had to deal with was trusting people outside our tribe. And that is very difficult, and it's still difficult today. So, we developed some relationships. Most of our relationships are people who are involved in the environment, because we feel that they are truly, that they are sincere in wanting to take care of Mother Earth and all living things. We also believe a lot of them don't know what they're doing, and they need us to guide them and to teach them, and we're happy to do that, and we are actually doing that. But as far as, we have met with the boards of supervisors, all 5 of them. Some are more receptive than others to us. Because they're politicians, they hold their cards close to their vest, and we understand that. They can't come out and go on record as doing that, and then a lot of them are waiting to see which way their constituents are going to go. And that's why it's so important for you to contact the politicians. But we have been effective in talking to a lot of the environmental organizations. They stand with us. Down in the Morgan Hill Gilroy area, we have a letter on our website. You can go, one of the drop-down bars in the menu is letters. And we have a letter, and that was signed by all the faith groups in Morgan Hill and Gilroy, the Muslim, the Catholic, the Unitarian, the Buddhist, and others. They've all signed on to that letter. We have support from the spiritual communities down there. We have a letter from the Latino community. We have support from when we had that walk, we had a very large contingency of Guamani and Filipinos. We were very surprised and happy to see them there. That's not a community that you see standing up often, to support these kinds of causes. We were very happy to see them there. And there's a number of others. And the Brown Beret, who helped us that day with the traffic and all.
Awesome.
We met them at our last meeting here. I know that some of you who were here, you saw them sitting here. I remember they were sitting right there. And we talked to them after, and they said that they stand with us and they're going to help us. And so for our walk, they helped us on the walk. So we do have we are gaining a lot of support. And we're very thankful for that, but we're also very cautious in all we do. We have to be cautious because, someday I'll come back and we'll talk about historic trauma.
Absolutely.
Generational
trauma.
Yes, intergenerational trauma. And that right there makes it, it makes it really hard to trust. It makes it hard to move outside your comfort zones and stuff like that. But because this is so important to us, that's what we're doing.
You know, I want to follow up on what Val said and what you were saying about, you know, the importance of reaching out to, you know, building relationships and so on with the supervisors. So the way we're doing this, and this is, you know, this is what Committee for Green Foothills does, is, you know, we do advocacy. So it's, you know, it involves building a movement, right? Not just, I mean, it's certainly very helpful to meet with the supervisors, send them emails and so on and so forth, but we look at who influences them, whose opinion do they care about. So this is the letter that Val mentioned, so it's a statement of opposition to the quarry, and we've started getting people to sign on to it. We started with environmental groups because we knew that it would be a no-brainer for them, so we got all of the local environmental groups have signed on. And we went to the Mexican Cultural Heritage Community, and they've signed on. And we're talking to a lot of other organizations. As Val said, if you're here, there's an organization that you represent, a church that you belong to, any group of that sort that wants to sign on to this statement of opposition, come and see me, and I'll give you my card, you email me, and I'll get you the, you know, just give me a written confirmation that you want to sign on. I'll send you the language, and you can let me know. And then our next step is we're going to elected officials and community leaders and saying to them, look at all this long list of organizations, local organizations that have signed this. Please add your name as well. The first person we went to, because we already knew he'd be with us, was Ash Kalra. He's excellent. Yes, and Ash is 100% with us. We're going to go to we're going to go to city council members. We're going to go to other state officials. You know, we're just getting started on this, and we're also going to be talking to community leaders. There's a lot of people who don't hold an elected office, but whose names are known and who have a lot of influence over the supervisors, just because they know that they represent an important constituency, and a lot of people listen to them. So this is how we influence the supervisors. It's a multi-layered advocacy campaign that we're doing. And come and join us. We're having a lot of fun, honestly.
Thank you.
I just want to add one little bit to that. When I was advocating for the what became the Valley Habitat Plan, I started showing up at political fundraisers. And, you know, as I think it was the Speaker of the California Legislature, Jesse Unruh, said, money is the mother's milk of politics. And simply showing up, they recognize your face, they recognize that you're part of the political activist community, and it opens a lot of doors. And that's the way the system works.
It's true.
I want to give special recognition to a couple organizations who have been really good to us. And that is the Indivisible organizations. And currently we have Friends of Juristac in Santa Cruz and the Friends of Juristac in San Jose. And if you want to get involved, I encourage you to look to them. They work very closely with our tribe. And they can help you become very active and very involved in protecting Juristac. And again, we give thanks to those organizations and others who are working with us.
Yeah, and I think we have some representatives of those groups here. Want to stand up or wave or something like that so people know who you are? So they can, yeah, so there we go. So talk to one of these people, and we'll pick you up.
So I wanted to make a suggestion, and I know it's time-consuming, but if you go to the Board of Supervisors meetings and also to San Jose City Council meetings, they always have public comment. And public comment, you can talk about anything that's not on the agenda. And so I know it is time-consuming, but if there is going to be something happening at the Board of Supervisors that you want to talk about anyway, or the City Council meeting, and public comment is always the first thing that happens. Talk about Juristac and say that you don't want the quarry, that Juristac has to remain sacred And personally, I think everybody should say that the land needs to be given back to the Amah Mutsun Tribal Band because it's their land, it was stolen from them, and it should be given back. I mentioned it at a Board of Supervisors meeting, and I looked at the Board of Supervisors, and the great majority of them knew what I was talking about. The other reason to talk about it is because all of these meetings are filmed by Create TV, and people watch it on television. So there will be people who are watching it who haven't heard about it, and you're informing them, in addition to the people who are sitting in the audience, and they could get interested and support the sacred site.
Actually, thank you. You just reminded me of something else. I mean, I touched on this earlier, but it is important. We keep on talking about the supervisors. We do expect that to be the final vote. The Planning Commission vote is also important. So it's important for everybody to be reaching out to the planning commissioners as well as the supervisors. Like I said, we figure that decision is going to be appealed, but if they vote to deny, that's a very powerful statement. And the supervisors do pay attention to that.
Thank you very much for this presentation today. Just for my education, I'm a resident of San Jose, Santa Clara County. I pay taxes to support the Open Space Authority. Could you address whether OSA funding could be directed towards Juristac?
Yeah, unfortunately, this area is not in OSA's area, so at least I don't think it is it?
I'd have to look at a map.
Yeah.
There's a donut hole in Gilroy,
Yeah, I know Gilroy is not.
but
Yeah.
I don't know about.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I'd have to look at a map and see.
So, but it's okay. At least it's somewhat okay. Ecology, I think you mentioned this earlier. There is, I will call it a coalition of private and public agencies that is ready to make an offer on this land, and has the funding, at least can line up the funding. There's grant money available. There's private funding that's available. So, if the landowner will sell at a reasonable price, then it can be purchased. So I don't believe that OSA is part of that. That's why I said I don't think that they're involved. But there is a coalition of groups that's working towards that. And the reason I'm being kind of cagey about this is because this is sort of like not really public information. So don't go writing this in the paper. This is really sort of like what we're looking towards, what we're hoping for ultimately, is that the property can be purchased for conservation. And I want to mention something very important here, actually. There was an article that ran in the Mercury News back in June, I think, or June or July, where they had the interviews with the landowners as well as with people from the Friends of Juristac. And then the landowners were saying, well, what we want to do is we'll develop a quarry on this portion of our land, and then the rest of it we would like to sell for conservation, and we think this is a really great compromise, we think it's a win-win. Well, in the first place, I think if you asked the Amah Mutsun if they thought it was a win-win to give up, to have a giant quarry in the middle of their sacred area, even if the rest of the land was sold for conservation. If somebody dug a giant hole in the middle even of just your house, and told you got to keep the rest of your house, that wouldn't make you happy. If someone, said, hey, I want to dig a quarry, or, I guess a little quarry, if I want to dig a little hole in the middle of the Vatican or in the middle of Mecca, and then said, but don't worry, you've still got the whole rest of the Vatican, so, why are you upset about this little hole? I don't think anybody would think that was okay. So that's the first answer. And the second one is that there's no reason why the County of Santa Clara should make it possible for these landowners to make more money than they otherwise would, right? It's not their business to maximize the landowner's profits. So there's no reason why these landowners cannot sell off this land at its appraised value right now. But what they want to do, obviously, is, you know, get that value jacked up higher, and then either they'll go ahead and develop it with the quarry, or maybe they'll sell it then, or who knows. But, you know, either way, they're going to be getting a lot more money out of it if these permits are approved. And again, there's no reason why the county should let that happen.
I use the miracle of the internet, and Juristac is in the Open Space Authority's jurisdiction. There was a donut hole with the city limits of Gilroy, and it's pretty prominently mentioned in their Santa Clara Valley Green Print, which is their vision for conservation.
I had a couple of questions. Dr. Weiss, I've heard some reports about the effect of drying up watersheds and rivers on environments downstream and on the coast, and how it could affect wildlife and even climate change. Do you have information on that?
Well, you know, in California, you know, water is by far the most precious resource we have. And areas that allow for groundwater recharge are particularly important, because that's the only reason we have water in our streams in the summertime, is because it's water that percolated into the aquifers during the rainy season and is slowly released. So, you know, Sargent Creek, which is where most of the impacts are going to be, is not a very large watershed, but given how precious a resource it is, you know, every acre foot matters in this state. And it becomes even more valuable under climate change. So I always tell people that my opening bid for the value of groundwater recharge, natural groundwater recharge, my opening bid is infinity. And I'm willing to negotiate it down from there. So if you think it's worth a tenth of infinity, that's still infinity. So these kinds of like permanent alterations of groundwater recharge, to me, it's just like we do not value that aspect of the environment nearly enough, and it all has downstream impacts. So, you know, it's like this groundwater recharge. It's water that it delivers and stores itself. And really all we have to do is get out of the way and have a light touch on the landscape, and it will continue to do so. And it only becomes more valuable as temperatures rise, as rainfall becomes more erratic. So I think it's something that just really needs to be more deeply considered in all environmental impacts. So, you know, this particular place, you know, it feeds right into the lower Pajaro, which is supporting agricultural uses downstream. And, you know, that really rich farming area around Watsonville. So, yeah, it definitely has impacts downstream. And it's a very valuable resource. Putting holes in the ground that are hundreds of feet deep and disrupting the aquifers is just, like I said, with wildlife corridor or wildlife linkage, it's just not a really good idea for the short-term economic gain of very few people.
My other question is a little more subtle for Val. This long history of Native American spirituality, do you think that it, I mean, you spoke of the benefits to people today. I've always felt a kind of magic about California and about the spirituality that's here. Do you think that your tradition sort of left a kind of legacy in the land and the environment from all the prayers and recognition of the value of life over those years?
Thank you for that question, and I have no doubt that is true. And, you know, our prayers were sincere, they were long-term. We had a direct relationship with Creator and with the animals and stuff like that. I know that the animals are waiting for us to come back and restore the native plants. That's what they need. The rivers, we got to restore the rivers, the waterways. We got to bring back the fish. We have to bring back clean air. And we're working towards that. But our prayers and our ceremonies on these lands made this place special. And I know that all tribes feel that way about their lands, and we respect that as well. It is, and Creator is directing us and guiding us today, and our ancestors are guiding us today. You know, a lot of people have said that, under the leadership our tribe has done a lot. And I just kind of crack up because I don't see it under my leadership at all. I believe that I have a really good relationship and I know how to pray and I know how to listen to the ancestors and listen to Creator. And I just ask for help and they're directing this. I'm not. And so all we have to do is all of us need to listen to our ancestors, listen to Creator, and learn to have that really strong relationship. And we'll know what's right and we'll know what's wrong and we'll know how to live our life. And we'll know what's needed here in California to restore what was lost.
Amen.
Hi, I'm Mimi from Orchard City Indivisible and Divest Silicon Valley and Southbay Indigenous Solidarity, etc. Thank you for mentioning the water. Is it the Potero River? That's my first quick question. Isn't that an endangered river in California or the nation on the Juristac lands? Or was it labeled endangered in the 90s or the 80s or something?
It probably was. The poor Potero River, it's just, the upper watershed has been abused. And by the time you get down past the Chittenden Gap, what used to be a really thriving floodplain is now constrained between levees where the river can't spread out, and it actually increases the flood risk down there. So the steelhead trout in the Potero River are just barely hanging on. I mean, it's at the point where every individual fish makes a difference. And that's usually a pretty good sign of the health of a river, is how species like steelhead trout are doing. So I could, go on the web and look up, but I believe the Potero did end up on one of those endangered rivers list.
Okay. And then my original question was, thank you for mentioning about partitioning up the land, because we hear that a lot, that, just 10% for the quarry. It's like, no. So that was a perfect response. So that was a question I had in my mind. But what about the other thing we hear, as well as the jobs, that this is going to create jobs? And it's just so ridiculous, because someone in county leadership said that to us recently, and we were really shocked, so thank you.
Yeah, it'll create maybe about, what is it, like 30 jobs or something like that. No, I'm serious. It's like, it's not going to create a lot of jobs. And, you know, we're still doing research on the supposed economic benefits of this quarry. But what we've found so far is, I think I could venture to say that it is questionable. It's looking kind of like any economic benefit and any jobs that this quarry provides. It's going to be in competition with other local quarries. So is it going to, any jobs that are created here maybe will just mean fewer jobs elsewhere in Santa Clara County, right? How is that a net benefit to the county or to the region? Again, like I said, we're still doing research, but it's really not looking like this is going to bring, you know, very much economic benefit to anyone other than the landowners. Ooh.
I apologize for speaking again, but I was wondering if we could shame the supervisors into voting against this horrible quarry by telling them that they're just supporting genocide and they're just continuing on this horrible history that happened on this land, and it's 2019, almost 2020, and it's about time to recognize what happened here and to call it out and to you know, just really put it out there, and that this quarry cannot be built. It's definitely not just the environmental impact that happens on the water and all the animals, but that it would just be a continuation of the genocide that's been going on here for hundreds of years, and it's about time it stops.
Yeah, I hope that shame won't be necessary. Although it's certainly something that we should do if we need to. I'm hoping that they'll, and we're all hoping, you know, that they'll be responsive to all the many impacts that are going to be caused by this, and you know that we're not going to have to actually go so far as to shame anybody. But if we need to shame them, we shame them. Yeah.
On behalf of everyone here in this very good company, we'd like to thank the panel for their very powerful presentations, and on behalf of everyone working so hard to protect Juristac, thanks to all of us who came out for this evening. And I think it's fair to say we could stay for a few more minutes if you'd like to speak with the panelists directly. So thank you, and let's offer a really round
There really depends on the back to protect Juristac. We have a website, protectjuristac.org, and you can learn more about that at the table. Thank you very much.